I thought this was quite interesting. I saw this. Vaush explains the dumbest argument against veganism. I'm going through some of Vaush's old stuff, and it's really interesting because when he had a conversation with Ask Yourself, he seemed very concerned with like hypocrisy and hypocrites. But to be fair, this was about, what, 3 years ago, so his position could have changed. But I will be questioning that sooner or later.
Spectre Carell, thank you for the $10. I think it's wrong to judge a population on what they eat while experiencing food instability. How privileged. Some populations need to eat alternative meats. Well, no, you have to take the Chad approach, was that it's wrong to eat meat in general. Sometimes that's the only thing that you can do.
The true Chad approach would be not only believing that it's wrong in general, but actually not participating in it. That would be the proper Chad approach. That would be true salad behavior, okay? So that's not the Chad approach, okay? That's a Chad take, but weighing up the utility of eating cheese against, you know, the perpetual exploitation, mutilation, killing, of other sentient beings. Like, that ain't Chad, okay? We need to make that clear.
If you're gonna starve unless you eat meat, like, okay, then you're doing a thing that's bad, but you're doing it to serve a larger good, so the math works out.
And the math also apparently works out if you really like cheese and you can do away with having cheese out of your diet and using the vegan alternatives because they're just not quite up to scratch for you. Of course, that's obviously as well. You weigh up the math and that makes it worth it as well.
I do think that humans have a right to kill to survive. I guess every animal does. But yeah. The stupidest thing that meat eaters, or I guess anti-vegans, because I eat meat, bring up
come on,
whenever, oh, hello, oh my goodness, did you just walk perfectly into hand grab range?
The irony, right? Like, he would have to commit to the no ethical consumption under capitalism if there were a cat farm, you know, exploiting, mutilating, and killing, you know, these cats. It's just interesting how to defend continuing to eat the chicken nuggets you like and specific brands of cheese that you like, that you'd have to commit to that being something that you would, even though you believe it would be wrong, that you would still actually engage in if it were part of the society. It's pretty wild to me.
What's the dumbest thing anti-vegans do? Oh, okay, this is a really dumb argument. Please, guys, never ever do this argument, okay? When, if somebody is like, hey, veganism is good, we should all be vegan, and your response is, huh, well, in the Uwatu tribe, in the far north, they have nothing to eat but whale blubber and bear fat. How dare you suggest their culture, their, like, or when woke ass lefties will be like, you're destroying the cult, how dare you say the native culture, fuck you. It's just, don't make those arguments.
I agree, and Austin, yeah, talks about how he likes meat, adoringly picks up pet. It's like the most apt time for that to have happened. There's like a poetic irony to it. But I agree, saying, oh, well, and a lot of the time people will appeal to other cultures to justify why they continue doing something. And not only that, like, if you believe culture is a justification to do, you know, whatever, you know, because culture though, and we must respect the culture, then you'll end up doing what that genius on Twitter did, where they justified cannibalism. So it's like, well, yeah, I've got to respect that because it's part of a culture. Or, you know, things like FGM. Like, these are cultural practices. Or in the UK, it's part of the culture for people to go out trophy hunting, exploiting horses, dogs, and foxes all in one go. So it's just like, well, I can't, just because it's part of the culture, it's part of the heritage, you know, I can't look at that and think, oh yeah, well that takes precedence over the rights and the lives of other sentient beings.
Why can't, I just, can't the Chad meat eaters be like, yeah, it is bad to kill animals, to eat them for personal pleasure, but I do it anyway. Like, just live it up.
How is that Chad? Like, that's cowardly, isn't it? And hypocritical. Apparently, Vaush no longer cares about hypocrisy. He did at one point, but it's hypocritical. It's, as far as I'm aware, it in itself is quite a horrific thing. When you know something is bad, yet you carry on doing it anyway. It's like not something that I would consider Chad behavior. Do you know what I mean?
At least then we can address like What about that argument where they assign literally zero moral worth to animals at all? It's a hell of a bullet to bite. Well, a lot of them will say that, but honestly, they're all lying.
I would have to agree. I think not all lying. I think some of them genuinely don't care. But for the most part, I think people just bite bullets for the sake of carrying on with their behavior. And I think Vaush kind of is an example of that. I think it is a possibility that Vaush is a walking, you know, a symbol of that kind of behavior.
All 100% lie about that. The people who say, like, I assign zero moral worth to animals would not have any problem with animal abuse, but they do. They clearly do. Only sociopaths don't, because we clearly see emotions and pain in animals, and they reflect in the same parts of our mind that we feel when we see human suffering. Maybe not to the same extent, but we absolutely do. That's a thing that we do. If a person really believed that animals had zero intrinsic moral worth, then to them a video of a cat being butchered and a like old piece of furniture being destroyed with a hammer would be identical. It would just be two pieces of property to them being torn apart. Pigeon! So, Pow Pow Giraffe, that projection of our humanity that you're referring to is the moral worth that I'm talking about. Pigeon, she just wants attention. Just because you can have empathy for creatures doesn't mean that they inherently have moral worth. There's no such thing as inherent moral worth.
This guy sounds vegan. What's his channel? He's not vegan. This is the thing. He agrees. He says, it's Vaush. He says, if you watch his debates with Ask Yourself and Perspective Philosophy, he did one with Vegan Gains, but I think it's been deleted from Vegan Gains' channel. It might be on Vaush's channel. But he said that it's like one of the biggest atrocities. We'll look back at it and think, yeah, that was one of the biggest atrocities happening. He even said to Ask Yourself that if he had, you know, dominion over the world, he would probably sort out animal agriculture before other issues, because that's how big of an issue it is to him. But because he believes no ethical consumption under capitalism, therefore he kind of refers to the fact, well, you can't call people bad because for engaging in the system, it's like, well, bad person and bad behavior are two different things. So I don't know why it becomes that conversation. Maybe, again, I'm having a smooth brain moment. Maybe that is my problem. But to me, it doesn't track. And it's weird to me. Again, maybe a smooth brain moment. You know, I have many of those. But he is a utilitarian, and you would think that, you know, even if the idea is no ethical consumption under capitalism, surely there would be some things that are worse, and he notes that, oh, well, that's the worst one. So surely engaging in that when there's an alternative and you can't stack up the maths against it, i.e., you know, taste, pleasure and all of this stuff, like you can't mathematically pin that against the negative utility caused by, you know, garnering those products, then it would surely still lead you to veganism, because there's so many utilitarian vegans, there's so many like deontological vegans, like threshold deontologists, and they are quite similar. I think I fall under threshold deontology, and it's quite similar to utilitarianism. So he is an excusitarian. He's not a vegan. It's a shame.
A product of axiomatic values that we hold. What we deign to have moral worth is arbitrary. The point that I'm trying to make is that the arbitrary process that we use to assign moral worth is heavily encoded in things that we find like intrinsically worthwhile or sympathizable. Sympathy is tied to our belief that humans have intrinsic moral worth. There's no extricating these. The belief that moral worth exists in some sort of extraneous...
No, this wasn't 3 years ago, Maz. His debate with Ask Yourself was like 3 years ago, where he said he was like, he didn't like hypocrites, he was concerned with hypocrisy, you know, hypocritical behavior annoyed him, stuff like that. This isn't 3 years ago, this was November the 29th of this year.
Objective sense, and it's totally detached from our biases and our perceptions. I don't think that's true at all. The fact that we empathize with animals means that we see in them a reflection of the axiomatic values, biases, and suppositions that we assign to humans. We may feel them stronger with people, we may not, but they're definitely existent. And if you don't want to go that route and you want to take like a no, my supposition of moral worth is derived exclusively from humans being humans and nothing else, I've never seen a person justify that. You can justify the idea that humans have the greatest moral worth because of our intelligence and emotional depth, and I can understand that. And you can also justify the idea that an in-species bias is a legitimate thing for us to justify, especially since we're capable of developing civilizational, like, values that other animals simply are not, but the idea that animals have no moral worth whatsoever has always seemed to me like Giga Coke coming from people who don't want to like deal with the fact that they're like eating animals.
I mean, yeah, like Chris Hines, he's going to be live streaming soon and talking about this study. They tested like 2 groups of people. One was eating animals, the other one was eating nuts, and they asked them their viewpoint on animals. And the people who weren't, eating their bodies, they were much more sympathetic towards animals, much more on the side of granting them moral value, which could demonstrate that like in that one act that people, as Vaush is saying, are giga coping when they want to make all these excuses. I think Vaush, my prediction is that he will go vegan eventually. It will just be this kind of thing that happens quite slowly, so it looks like, and he can feel like he came up with the idea himself. There's this amazing quote and I wish I remembered who it was from, but it was basically like the best way to get people to agree with your ideas is to make them believe that they came up with it themselves. And I do have that belief that a lot of people, and I would say Vaush is an example of that, don't want, there's ego attached to people telling them you're wrong, and then for them to turn around and go, okay, you're right, I'm wrong, let me change so I'm right like you. That's quite a stab to the ego, especially for some people. So I do think he'll end up going vegan because he makes more and more vegan arguments as time goes on, and he gets annoyed at the anti-vegans in his comment sections, whereas like a year ago he was getting really just mad at the vegans. He didn't want to speak to them, anything like that. He still doesn't really seem to. So I think that he will make that change. I just think it will be quite gradual, and he'll make so it looks like, oh well, I just came to this by my own fruition.
You understand what I'm saying? So a person isn't wrong if they say that animals have no intrinsic moral worth, because I don't know if there's a right statement on that. I will say, though, that the things that we heavily associate with moral worth are biologically applicable to animals, and that it's really, really, really hard to justify any, like, androcentric moral perspective in a way that completely discludes all other animals. Very, very strange why a person would even care to do something like that.
Yeah, well, it's so that they can defend their behaviour, because, like, a lot of people, they truly are concerned with hypocrisy, and they don't want to be seen as hypocrites, and they don't want to turn around and say, I know this is wrong, but I'm going to do it anyway, because that socially looks really bad. If someone, personally, is like, I know the horrific impact of this thing I'm doing, but I don't care, I'm going to do it anyway, that bodes badly on their personhood. That looks bad. So they will, as you say, Geiger cope and make these excuses instead, so that they aren't wrong, and that the vegans are wrong, or the argument's wrong, or they don't care, things like that. So it's not really a surprise that people do this and put their head in the sand, and I would agree. I haven't yet seen people make a distinction between humans and other animals that would justify the exploitation of those animals without it just not being actually a difference that's present, and therefore leading to them having to bite the bullet on absurdities like Vaush did 3 years ago with Ask Yourself, where Ask Yourself put the animals and he changed them to humans and put them in the same situation, hypothetically, that those animals are in. And Vaush was like, I have to bite the bullet on that. Rather than just being like, wow, this is where my position would lead me to, like, wow, I should really, change my behavior, which is usually what people do. Ah, Vaush, go vegan already. Become a salad. Come on. What are you doing? What are you doing?